Does the Panthers' plan make sense for Cam Newton?
Okay, so this is interesting what they've got going. They have now begun to surround him with weapons because it was almost malpractice what was around him at different points. They still got to get the line thing straight, but they got Samuel from Ohio State. They got Christian McCaffrey. They drafted Devin Funchess last year. They drafted Kelvin Benjamin a couple of years before that. Like, they've gone in on trying to surround Cam with the weapons that are necessary. Now, for most of his career, the plan has been throw the ball down the field, right? In part because he's such a big dude, he has such a big arm, and with the running threat as he was, that it would open things up down the field. The other part is there have been questions about how good he is at the short passing game, whether his accuracy is what you want in that type of game, if that's the game for him to be playing. Problem is, in 2017, you can't drop your quarterback way back and have him wait forever to throw the ball without him getting broken down. We've seen this. Last year, he got broken down at the end of the year. We've had these other seasons where you've seen the injuries. When he's not hurt, when he's playing healthy, things like 15-1 can happen. When not, this team doesn't have that much of a chance. So are they protecting him at the expense of what he does well is the question. I think they have to give a chance at this, though. They have to give it a run to see how this can go before they go in another direction.
And we should underscore how impressive, increasingly impressive in retrospect, that 2015 MVP was. How little help he had. You were talking about the malpractice. Didn't have an offensive line. Had a system that wasn't made for him and yet managed to be as good as he was. But Bo, I wonder, though, is it fair to say that this adjustment, this remaking of Cam Newton, to refer to the great Jonathan Jones's piece on SI, is this out of just sheer desperation? Because Cam Newton may be able to do these things. It may be within his powers. But this is not what Cam Newton has been the best at, and it's not what his gifts indicate that he would be great at. Because we can look, for instance, Kean Fahey, our friend, football analyst, the average depth of target in the NFL in terms of where is he putting the ball, how far away is it? First, only once below 8 yards was Cam Newton. More passes, 21 yards, and more than that downfield than to or behind the line of scrimmage. And he has been imprecise as a short passer. That has not been his game, but in a world in which Cam Newton is everything, he is the franchise, he is as important to this team as any other player is to any other team. It feels like this is something you do because you have no other choice.
I think it's something you do because he is your franchise, and therefore you protect your franchise. Like,
right.
The evolution of the NFL offensive passing game has a lot to do with the evolution of defense and the speed of the guys that are rushing the passer now. These are the things that you typically have to do. And one thing where I've always been torn about what the Panthers are doing, you cannot treat your quarterback like a running back. You just cannot do that. At the same time, what if your running back, like quarterback, is really, really good doing that? Do you just ride him out till he's burned out? I don't think that's fair to him. I don't think it's necessarily fair for the long-term prospects of this franchise, right? So I don't know what it is that they're supposed to do, but I don't think it's necessarily desperation. I think you, at some point, you had to be working toward a time with Cam Newton as a quarterback where you were going to a place where you could do more of these short passes. Now, that being said, a lot of what they're talking about with short passes is short passes to Christian McCaffrey, short passes to Samuel. We're not talking about necessarily just a bunch of slant routes to Greg Olsen over the middle. They're talking about using these running backs to get the ball out of Cam's hands. The other part of it is the possibilities of what you can do with McCaffrey, where you can line him up all over the field. Samuel, you can do the same thing, and them in the running game with Cam Newton will be interesting to see. The one thing I was worried, though, about the Panthers over these various years, too many times where you're a leading rusher by number of attempts has been Cam Newton. He is the centerpiece of the run game. He is the centerpiece of the pass game. They need to, I think, for his long-term viability, start moving toward him simply being the centerpiece of the pass game and a weapon in the run game.
He ran 90 times for 359 yards and 5 touchdowns last year, which is great until you realize that those are career lows. I mean, this is the evolution. Are we seeing the end of the greatest short yardage weapon in NFL history?
That's not going to stop.
Is that so?
That's no.
They're going to stay with that.
I see no way in the world. If you've got him and it's 3rd and 3, you cannot ignore the fact that you have him. I can't see that part of it change.
Even if he's 246 and not 260. That Cam Newton is still better than whatever they got.
Yeah, 246 is still pretty damn big. Like, my guess is the 14 that are lost out of the 260 are probably not the 14 that were needed to be kept. But he is the single greatest short yardage option in the history of the NFL. That will not stop, I don't think.
All right, well, last week on the show, we had Kirk Morrison here, and he said adamantly that Cam Newton's best days are behind him. Now, that's not to say that he couldn't have a decent year this year, but that you will never see that MVP caliber season from him again. Do you agree with that?
I think that's fair. I think peak Cam Newton is in the rear view because the peak powers of Cam Newton required using the greatest arm in the NFL. Probably throws the ball faster, has a better deep ball than anybody we can think of. And yeah, look, we cannot deny the reality that Cam Newton's power and his genius and his singularity was that he was a runner. He was a runner who could knock you over. And if he can't do that as much, now you're asking him to be a different kind of player. And I don't think that guy can possibly be as good as 2015 Cam Newton.
Yeah, but what's it mean, though, if he's not as good, but the offense is better because of the role that he's playing within the offense? That becomes the question. Because for him, we are going to we are ultimately going to evaluate Cam Newton on whether or not he wins a Super Bowl. Because that's the one thing anybody's got left that they can say about him. And we saw that. They went 15-1. They got to the Super Bowl. They did not win it. And then all of a sudden, the I Hate Cam delegation popped up with, ha, 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 look how mad you are about losing that Super Bowl, right? I would argue that most likely the path toward that Super Bowl is probably moving him toward a game that keeps him safer, because you just can't keep having these seasons where he's ending broken down or starting broken down. And we've had that for just about half the time that he's been in the league. So he'll never be like video game Cam. But Michael Vick coming back off of the suspension in 2010, that's probably the best Michael Vick we ever saw. It was not video game Michael Vick, but it was the best Michael Vick that we saw. Maybe we get the same thing from Cam Newton.
Right, and we must agree that the Cam Newton that doesn't get concussed, that doesn't have debilitating shoulder injuries, which reduce him to a shell of a man at the end of last season, that is the best current version of Cam Newton we can hope for.